There's going to be a Mandalorian movie, question mark? Patrick Klepek, tell us about this.
Kathleen Kennedy has spun the Star Wars movie wheel again and is tick, 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 tick. Oh, this time it has landed on reliable Jon Favreau, who, was the showrunner. I don't know how he's credited exactly on The Mandalorian, but, obviously a kind of chief architect of a lot of Star Wars' relevance, especially in television and Disney Plus with The Mandalorian and the several seasons that we've seen there. But the expectation had originally been we'd be getting a new Rey-led Star Wars film that kind of kicked off a new era of Star Wars that takes place after Rise of Skywalker. But instead, it seems like maybe some season 4 scripts of The Mandalorian are being turned into a new film called The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is supposed to go into production this year. I don't think we have an exact date for when it's arriving, but Bob Iger is tapping his watch saying I think he's actually said that a Star Wars film needed to be in theaters by Christmas 2025 or something like that. And it seems to be maybe this is a little bit of the impetus for why this film in particular is maybe being fast tracked.
Well, I think there's only one detail there that I'm not sure is 100% correct. And you're forgiven, Patrick, because at this point, the number of movies they have announced is far higher. The number of movies they've announced that have not been made is far higher than the number of movies that have actually been made.
Yeah,
right?
That is true.
So
yes.
It's okay to not keep this all straight. But my understanding is Mandalorian season 4 was gonna happen. They had finished all the scripts, but they didn't. The strike happened, so they're like, okay, well now we got to retool this, and maybe some of those / all of those scripts will go into this Mandalorian and Grogu movie directed by Jon Favreau. We'll see. Separately, there are also movies in production, one starring starring Daisy Ridley playing Rey, that takes place after the Rise of Skywalker. That was supposed to be directed by Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy. At one point, it had Damon Lindelof working on it, so it seems to have gone through multiple creative cycles. I just heard literally this morning that movie might not be happening via some rumors online or might be delayed. So who knows what's going on with that? There's supposed to be a James Mangold directed movie that takes place in the early days of the Jedi, and then separately, Dave Filoni is supposed to be directing a movie that brings together the Ahsoka and all the other stuff that's going on in the Star Wars universe. Unclear whether this and the Mandalorian and that are the same movie. I think they're not. I think they're separate movies, and maybe that one will still happen in the future. So yes, so theoretically, there's 4 different Star Wars movies, of which this one, Mandalorian and Grogu, seems like the most likely one to happen the soonest. Right? That's kind of my assessment.
Yes. And also Jon Favreau is he's an efficient filmmaker, right? If you followed the production history of The Mandalorian, to your point, all the report that the scripts for season 4 were already done. It was always fascinating whenever a new season of The Mandalorian would finish, and then Favreau would do an interview. He's like, "Oh yeah, I already finished the scripts for the next season." And it's such an interesting contrast to how we've gotten used to how a lot of blockbuster television shows are made these days, where you might go years in between a new season, which is so different than the way television would often be in the past. When I watch a show like Lost, it finished in May. Well, the new season will be back in September, just because of the way production has changed. Of course, obviously budgets are different, but if there is, I made the joke about Kathleen Kennedy spinning a Star Wars movie wheel, because you're right. At this point, there are more canceled announced projects than there are movies that have actually made it to any meaningful period of production, which I think speaks to a lot of the challenges. What do you do after the creative disaster that was Rise of Skywalker? What do you do when the legacy of Star Wars is so intertwined with a group of characters and the Skywalker family in particular? How do you move past that? I think those are fundamentally challenging questions that would vex. And it's not like Kathleen Kennedy is new to this. This is a veteran, executive in Hollywood that has worked across so many different amazing projects over the years. So to find her trying to find a path forward in this is not, I think, super surprising, and this speaks to the challenge of Star Wars as a franchise. But that's all to say, of any of these projects that I think will actually make it into a theater for you and I to watch at some point, I think Favreau's going to get the job done. It seems like the moment you hit the Jon Favreau button is can we just please get a Star Wars movie into a movie theater? And I really do think it's going to happen. And I think people are underestimating the degree to which Grogu, in particular, will be. I don't know if that turns into a $1 billion movie, but that character is still extremely popular, and I think there is a
Mhm.
chance for this. Like Favreau's an extremely skilled filmmaker. I think people also don't really forget that sometimes. He's only directed one episode, I think, or two episodes of The Mandalorian, and the ones in which he's touched as a filmmaker have been excellent. So I actually have a high degree of confidence that this will be like a very competent, really fun movie, which is more than you can say of, a lot of Star Wars projects at the moment.
Uh, yeah, so you're, like, excited about the you're thinking to yourself, "Hey, Mandalorian and Grogu, logical next step would be to have a movie and to see it on the big screen." That would be, like that's kind of your overall reaction is like,
Logical
I'm
next step,
psyched."
I don't know, except that like it makes sense for the stops and starts that this franchise has had. Like I think the formulaic nature of the Mandalorian makes a lot of sense where you could tell a a one-off movie, whether I don't know how connected this is going to be to what Filoni is doing. I have no idea what sort of weight that like Star Wars is going to put on this film to set up what comes next. But where, without getting into spoilers of where The Mandalorian is as a franchise, where those characters are left the last time we saw them, they can go have adventures and it could be completely inconsequential to setting up, any of the villains from Ahsoka or the other parts of the Star Wars universe. I just think there's like the floor of a Favreau movie is pretty high. I just don't know what the ceiling is, and so I expect this to be like a really good time. And whether it's transcendent, I don't know, but I don't know if Star Wars is capable of that these days outside of an Andor.
Yeah, we should also mention that a couple months ago, news broke that Dave Filoni has been promoted to chief creative officer at Lucasfilm. I am curious what your reaction to that news was, Patrick Klepek.
Well, when you and I were recapping Ahsoka, one of the things I remember pointing out was there are lots of ways to criticize Filoni's approach to filmmaking, to telling stories in Star Wars, but he has a vision. Like he has a style. I think it's very George Lucasy.
Hmm.
It's for better or worse, but he has a vision and he has an approach, and I think something that Star Wars has been badly missing. Um, it happened a bit in the sequel trilogy, and certainly post Rise of Skywalker is just walk forward. I don't know what's down that path, but just start walking. And I think there's plenty of reasons that part of what Filoni attempts to do, maybe it doesn't work, but he's got a vision. And at this point with Star Wars, I just rather go take a whack at it, like see what happens. Like it's a Star Wars can be anything, and so if for some reason the Filoni stuff falls kind of flat, I mean, there's plenty of easy ways to hit the reset button in a universe that is that flexible.
All right, all that stuff Patrick just said, I want you as a listener to hang on to all that. That's a lot of positivity, a lot of enthusiasm. All right, just cherish and nurture those feelings. Uh, because I'll just say, I thought it was, for me personally, terrible news that Filoni has been put in charge. I have been really unimpressed with everything I've seen. Of which I understand he has masterminded, like Ahsoka. Some great moments, some cool action scenes. Didn't hate it, but not what I would say great television or great storytelling. And in fact, frequently laughably terrible storytelling. Dave Filoni, from what I can tell, seems to be somebody who is obsessed with Star Wars pasts and Star Wars middles, like filling in the gaps between certain things that happen. Very little I have seen tells me that he is a good caretaker for Star Wars's future. To do interesting, bold, new things with the franchise. Uh, I've seen nothing that indicates that he's a good person to do that. Andor is an example of something that I think literally will just never get made again under Dave Filoni. Like it matches nothing of what he has created before, and it is also, in my opinion, the greatest thing that Star Wars has made over the course of the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even Mandalorian, and which a lot of people say, oh, it's like fresh and interesting. It is from what I have seen of The Mandalorian, which is admittedly very little, right? I basically just watched the first season. Uh, it has felt to me just as self-referential and just as stuck in the past and interested in kind of rehashing ideas and iconography of the past as everything that's come since then, and or accepted. So when I heard that he was going to be in charge, my reaction was Star Wars is just not going to be part of my life anymore after Andor season 2, which hasn't come out yet. But like, that's probably going to be the last thing that I really get excited about in the Star Wars universe. And that was really sad for me, you know? So anyway, maybe, you never know what's going to happen in the future. Like maybe Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau or whoever else is in charge are going to decide, I'm going to take the franchise in a different direction. But nothing I've seen so far indicates that that's the case. And they've had years of chances to try something new and interesting that just hasn't, none of which has materialized, in my opinion. So Mandalorian and Grogu. As for the movie, I understand why they're doing it. I honestly hope it works. Like, it really feels like this is it's just, despite everything I've just said, it's sad to see a once great film franchise struggle so badly. Like,
Yeah.
there have been so many aborted attempts at making movies. I'm thinking of Rian Johnson's trilogy that will never happen. It will never happen.
No.
David Benioff and D.B. Weiss were going to make a Star Wars movie at one point. Patty Jenkins released a teaser trailer for Star Wars Rogue Squadron at one point. That movie was supposed to come out, I think, last month, by the way. So it's sad to see. I'm old enough to remember when Star Wars came out. Like, clear the books. That was going to be the movie event of December of that year, and now they're struggling to even make literally anything. And that's just sad to see. So, for the sake of just once great film franchises being restored to their former glory, I hope it works. And it seems like as sure a bet as any. Patrick Klepek, thanks for listening to that mini rant.
I think you reflect where a lot of Star Wars fans are at, and I think the Filoni, again, I don't really celebrate that choice necessarily, but to your point, the creative paralysis this franchise has been under, especially in the last couple of years, especially post Rise of Skywalker, it's less that I think Filoni is going to execute anything particularly interesting, as much as sometimes just do the damn, like, just execute. Like, I'm poking it with a stick.
Just ship something.
Do something.
Right. Do something. This is where the standards have fallen to, is just get something made, and then we'll go from there.
Star Wars. Like, it's Star Wars. And, I do wonder if the Disney Plusification of everything, which has done terrible damage to Marvel as a brand, in their own production. Like, I think Star Wars has been hurt by, like, hey, we've got and it started with the original, like, let's do a Rogue One, let's do a Boba Fett, you know what I mean? Like, just do more. And, like, the single most damaging thing that has happened to Star Wars probably in the last, like, 10, 15 years was do more of them. When the defining aspect of Star Wars over the past 40 years has been they're rare and, like, and it's an event. And the moment you kind of took that away, I do think on some level you started chipping it away at what made Star Wars in the first place.
Was like the scarcity was a key component of it. Interesting, right? I do remember the time before Phantom Menace came out, right? There was all this mystique around it because it was decades, right? It was decades between those movies, and during that time, a whole extended universe sprang up, which, by the way, I think is it's kind of weird to me. I was talking with my friend Peter Soretta, and I was saying how it's weird that a lot of people are speculating Dave Filoni's movie, not Mandalorian and Grogu, but this other movie that's going to tie together Ahsoka and Clone Wars and all that stuff, is going to be called Heir to the Empire. And Heir to the Empire is a book by Timothy Zahn, which I have read decades, probably when I was in, I don't know, middle school. I read that book, and it was awesome. It was an awesome book. And at one point, Star Wars declared, hey, the extended universe is no longer true. We're calling it something called Star Wars Legends instead. And they kind of erased the extended universe, but now they're bringing back parts of it, basically, which is like Grand Admiral Thrawn is going to be in it probably, and so I just think that's weird. And then my friend Peter responded, "Well, David, that's why they're called legends. Maybe they happened, maybe they didn't. You know, very smart branding, Star Wars Legends." So I thought that was astute. But yeah, Patrick, I tend to agree with you that uh, it is part of it was that anyway, the point I was making was that for all these years, people were just speculating, like, oh, is there ever going to be another one? Like, what's going to happen? And ironically, we have reached that state again. Only they've announced like 10 movies, and maybe one of them will be made. So, in any case, you mentioned the Disney Plusification of Star Wars, and I think what you're trying to say is we are guessing that because Star Wars and Marvel stuff is available so readily at home now on Disney Plus, it makes the theatrical event less special. It makes people less likely to turn out for the theatrical event. Maybe that's true, but it is, I think, worth remarking. These were two of the greatest business acquisitions of all time, Marvel and Lucasfilm. And I do think it's notable that after some really big financial successes, legendary historical financial successes, they're both really struggling right now, right? Like, I think there's not going to be any Marvel movies come out this year other than Deadpool 3.
Yep.
And that is the fewest Marvel movies that's come out in any year for a really long time.
Since post COVID, right? So Endgame happens, and then COVID hits, begins the year after, which I believe created like an entire year where there wasn't a Marvel film, but that was by accident, not by on purpose. And this, the writers,
since there was a world altering pandemic,
right?
This is the fewest number of Marvel films, right? So, and yeah, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Well, and here you have the writer's strike also playing an important factor, but you cannot separate. The writer's strike is perhaps ends up being a convenient excuse for a company having to completely rethink its entire creative strategy. At least Star Wars has the advantage of, well, we don't have that much going on, so we can't constantly disappoint you. Whereas Marvel, because the engine is just always moving, it's whatever changes they're making, none of them pay off for years. And in the meantime, it's just, well, put that other thing out the door that we're not really happy with, and like another round of bad headlines. Like, at least with Star Wars, you cancel a project. Yeah, everyone makes fun of the fact that you can't get a movie out the door, but it's not like a critical commercial failure. It's just a bad series of headlines and blogs and trades. Whereas Marvel just keeps taking body blow after body blow.
That is a $100 million loss you're taking if the Marvels doesn't do well or something along those lines, right? So it's very different. But odds on whether this Mandalorian and Grogu movie are going to happen, Patrick Klepek, I would say 80% plus. Is my guess. I think they also got to know they've been announcing a lot of these things, and so they got to know, they're like, hey, we actually have to make one of these happen if we're going to keep announcing them, right? So. I say 80% plus. What do you think, Patrick?
Oh no, I'd say 80 to 80.
You're like it sounds like you're like 100%. You're like,
I'm 100%. I think this movie comes out like you have a formula in place, you have actors in place, you've shot versions of this before, you're just doing the bigger one. You know what I mean? Like all the other components, like even the other, like, the Ray-led one is falling into a very familiar, like, toxic fan base. Like there's just so much going on with these other projects. This one just feels like the reason it was announced, as boring as it might seem, I think boring is the point. Like, we know it's a success. People like these characters. Pedro Pascal is bigger than ever as an actor. You know what I mean? Like, this movie will come at the right time. It'll come around Last of Us season 2. You know what I mean? Like, there are some things in the mix that like are going to benefit this project. So that's why I think it'll happen. I would bet money it'll happen. For me, it's just from a quality standpoint, I know what the floor is. I just don't know what the ceiling is. And that's what kind of remains to be seen. I
do have to say, I'm feeling like some flop sweat coming off of Disney Plus these days, like, or the whole like enterprise. I think, part of it snapped into place when they did the Werewolf by Night in color. Do you remember that? Like,
yes.
Michael Giacchino made a Marvel Werewolf by Night. Very good. And then a year later, they said, what if we did Werewolf by Night in color? And it's like, okay, like part of the whole point was that it wasn't gonna be in black and white, but it's like it almost feels like, as you said, they're spinning a wheel, or they're looking around and saying, "We gotta get a Star Wars movie into theaters. It's been too long." And they're like, "Well, we have, as you said, we have all the sets, we have the volume, and we have the actors, and the director is interested. Hey, why don't we put Mandalorian into the? What is stopping us?" And they realized that the answer is nothing. So that's what they're doing here. So anyway, I feel like a little bit of desperation, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's all very orderly and in control. Just not the impression I get these days. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.